Hey, good afternoon. Welcome to our monthly Dalim Tips and Tricks webinar. My name is Alex, and today we'll be talking about ES project templates. If you're new to our GoToWebinar series, I think this has actually changed a little since we took the screenshot. We got to update the slides, but there is a zoom button somewhere on the top of the screen that you can use to adjust the scaling if my screen appears too large or too small. There is also in the it's got a question saying no audio. Can you guys hear me, or?
I think that came in before you started.
Okay.
I'm answering the questions if there's any other on that.
Okay. Just want to make sure before I talk too much. But as far as GoToWebinar settings go, we also do have a Q&A area in the main control panel. So if you have any questions, you can type them in there. Typically, we wait until the end to go over questions. If anything particularly pertinent pops up, I may pause to address it in the moment. So, as mentioned, this is part of our monthly Dalim webinar series. We typically do a webinar the third Wednesday of each month. As soon as we know what we're going to be doing, we typically put it on our website at blanchardsystems.com/events. I've also been publishing notices on our Zendesk portal, as well as recordings of videos from prior sessions. So be sure to keep an eye there as well. As mentioned today, we're going to be talking about project templates, sort of a back to basics, because there are some new features here in ES6 that made us think this was worth revisiting. So I'm gonna assume that most of you have at least seen a project template or have a very basic familiarity of what it is. But we're going to go over creating and linking project templates to customers, the different ways you can assign users to projects, and some of the benefits and drawbacks of those. The ways that you can link job ticket layouts to a specific template. Managing the folder structure if you have like a hierarchical job ticket where you have, or a project where you have a lot of different subfolders, and an overview of some of the new ES6 features that come into play here. So first off, what are project templates? Project templates are basically a way you can easily automate the tedious work involved in setting up new projects. Typically, if you wanted to, you could just go into here and just click plus and create a new project and go in and fill in your workflow and add in all your approvers. But if you're going to be creating a lot of projects in ES for a certain customer and you're going to be creating them in a fairly consistent way, that's extra work you don't need to do every time. Now, traditionally, these were set up under the customer area here. So you click on a specific customer, and if you went over to the templates tab here, it would give you a list of all the templates that they had assigned to them. If you wanted to create a new one, you could click the plus here, and it would bring up the screen that shows you, it's basically a facsimile of the job ticket. And whatever settings you put in here, when you create a new project that uses this project template, it's going to copy these settings and use them as the starting point. So as just a quick overview of a few things in here that you can control is you have the main area down here. We'll delve into a bit on how you would assign different users to projects. You can use this to control by the default color space that is used for projects created using this. If you want them to use Grackle or Swap or some special setup for proofing. I think Mike did a webinar on that a few years ago that was pretty good. That goes into a little more depth on that. You can also set up, obviously, workflow. If you're doing imposition, versions, and section setup is done in here as well, which might get a little out of the scope of this webinar. What we're going to be focusing on today is approval assignments, layouts, job ticket layouts, and folders. So once you create a template in here, it'll show up in your list. I'll just make a fairly generic one here. I'll put myself in as an approver. Help if I could type here. And then it'll show up in this list, and you could click in here and select which is the default. When you create a project through the ES interface, you have the ability to choose which template it uses, but it's going to use the default generally, unless you specify another one at creation time. So, for example, here we have the default 0, which is the template ships for the ES. It's a very bare bones template. It just runs files through Wiffle dialog, which basically generates an approval and generates a preview and has one approval cycle in it. So, pretty basic stuff there. But the one thing I think that tended to trip people up with the screen was if you wanted to edit a template, you had to remember which customer it was linked to. So if you're coming in here, you've got one template that you want to look at, and maybe I've got one under my the subfolders one here under my demo corp customer. If I don't remember what customer I had that linked to, I had to search for it first before I could go in here and edit it. The second thing that was a little confusing about this old way of doing things is that there are buttons here for plus, which is to add a new template. There is link icon here, which you can link a new template to this customer. These can be linked to multiple customers. And then there's this unlink button here. And one of the things that I think people have run into issues with in the past is if you hit this, it doesn't delete the template. It just unlinked it from the specific customer. And I think we had a few tickets over the years where people had project templates that were unlinked from all their customers, but they never really got cleaned out of the system because there was no way to delete them. Now in ES6, we do have a new area in the user profile tab in the administration area where you can tweak these. This is still beta, so I think they're still tweaking the UI in here because it looks a little different from what you just saw on the customer screen. But it's basically showing the same stuff. So you can go in here and edit your approvals, edit your workflows. You don't have to remember where you saved that project template. You can also, if you want to, directly delete from here. You have the ability to export project templates if you want to move these over to a new system. And you also have the ability to duplicate them. So if you have a customer that's you have two customers that are using one project template and you want to split that off, then it's rather than having to mimic all the settings and go through all that rigmarole, you just hit duplicate in here, create a copy, and then work with that. So nothing particularly groundbreaking here, but this is an incredibly useful way to manage these. So as far as the UI, that's the new UI, but I wanted to go over as far as what would you tweak in here with project templates. And I think the most common or the foremost use of these is you have to set them up if you want to control what workflow and what approvers a specific customer has. So you might have set up here where here's just a simple one I made that has document workflow with 2 approval steps. I'm using the template to assign my users to 2 separate approval steps in here. And I'm also assigning them to the project overall as well. So if I were to create a new project under Demo Corp, and I don't have that as my default now, but if I switch to that here, you can see that it copies all the settings from that template. I can see it pulls in my approvers here and all my settings, so I'm good there. Now, the one thing you have to be aware of, I guess, in here, though, is depending on how likely these approvals are to change in the middle of a job or deviate from the template, you have to keep in mind there's a few different ways you can put them in here. And I actually might bring up a second window here. I'm moving back and forth a little, so bear with me 1 second here. So let's come in here. We'll make a new project that uses this template. I'll call it to approval. And I'll upload I have a few test files in here I can use. So I'll push this file in. You can see it pulled in my approvers just fine. There are a few different ways you can assign approvers to an approval step in one of these templates, or even in a job in general. But it's one thing to keep in mind when you're setting these up in the overall template is, let's say I go into my job and I decide that I want to add like another approver in here. So maybe I want, I'll choose the JF admin. The way this works is that the project copies from these settings are sort of sticky, I guess would be the best way to put it. The project, once created, copies from the project template. When pages are uploaded, they copy then from the project job ticket, but they don't stay in sync with it. So, for example, I changed the approval here. If I were to upload a second file in here, then you'll see the new one picks up my new approver, but this other one here doesn't have it because that didn't exist in my project setup at the time this file came in. So one other way you could work around this is if you wanted this to be a little more flexible, rather than direct assigning approvers, you could also do role-based assignments or group-based assignments. So I could have, for example, a group of maybe design approvers. I have the design approval group. I want to approve this. I could say that anyone in this group, actually make this a little bigger here, number of approvers. I want at least one person from the group to approve this file. That way, if you uploaded a file and you had the project set up that way, then it would still be sticky in that the approval would stay stuck to that design approvers after the file had been uploaded. But you could change the members of that group if you need to add someone in to give them the right to handle that approval. Now, one other option you have too is, and I should mention is inside, you can always go in here and right-click properties and change the approvers manually. But if you're dealing with a case where you need to make that tweak and you have a lot of files in a job, that's more manual than you probably want to go. So the one way, as I mentioned, is you could use approval groups. The other option is you could use roles. And I have a few roles assigned over here. Basically just design approver, editorial approver, legal approver, marketing approver. You could assign people those roles in a project. I'll actually do it in the project over here. I'll go in here. And maybe I'll say that for this approval, I want this to be, I'll just use the design approver role. I'll make that an approver. And then I'll go over here and I'll assign these users the design approver role. I'll actually add myself in there too. Actually, I'll leave myself out for now so I can show off in a minute. So now if I were to upload a new file, you'll see it came in and it has the design approvers here. And I need one design approver to approve. This is yellow to me right now. I can't approve it because I'm not assigned in there. But if I were to go in here and change this and add myself in, as I mentioned, it wouldn't show up. But if I change and make myself a design approver, and I think I probably have to refresh the screen here. Yep. Now I can go ahead and approve that page. So that's one thing you want to consider when setting up these project templates is how rigid or how flexible you want these approvals to be after the fact. That is one area where we've seen people run into issues where maybe they set up a template and they haven't changed it in a few years, and they realize all of a sudden that they need to add a new person in or make some kind of change. And you can do that by editing the files and clicking on them, but that's a little more tedious than we want to go if we're focusing on maximum automation here. Now, one other way this can be useful with approvals and those assignments is by default, a lot of the profiles that ship with ES, they allow your users to see pretty much all the projects in their level of hierarchy. So if I log in as one of my New Orleans end users here, and let's make a few projects under Demo Corp here.
Be careful with New Orleans, you might get hit by a hurricane.
So let's see here. I'm going to do, we'll do one with the default setup in here. So this is just the default project templates. I'm going to make one with, I think I have one in here with, yeah, my fancy templates. By default, a lot of the templates that ship with ES or user profiles that ship with ES, I mean. When you log in, they show you everything, every project at your level of the hierarchy or lower. So these users are under the New Orleans organization. So they can see all the projects in these customers. But you might have cases where, especially if you have a lot of projects in the system, you only want users or certain users to only be able to see projects that they have a role in. Either just for convenience or maybe for permissions, you want them to only be able to see like the projects where they need to approve. If it's not one of their projects, you don't want them to see it. There's an option when you're setting up the user profiles for these users called Only Related Projects. And what this does is, in order to see a project, you have to be physically assigned to it in this user's assigned a project area. And again, this is something you can configure at the individual project level, but this is something you probably want to consider at the project template level, is adding those assignments in. I made a second copy of this profile here, Customer Limited, that has that enabled. And so now if I log out and I'll log in with that Customer Limited, log in with this profile, this user can only see those projects that he's assigned to here in this area. So this would be one thing you'd want to consider in like a project template. Generally not something you could always tweak it in a project if a project needed specific changes from the templates. But this is the main area where you'd probably want to set that at as high a level as you could, so that you don't have to tweak that manually on projects if you don't need to. Now, one other area in here that could be useful with approvals is maybe you've got a situation where you've got different workflows or different approvals within a particular project based on what type of file it is. Just as an arbitrary example, maybe it's ad files versus editorial files. You're doing like a magazine. And you need a different set of approvers for each page in, or for each page type in a project. I went ahead and I made two workflows over here for my ad pages and my edit pages. Edit workflow is fairly simple. I just have a design approval, and then I have an editorial approval. My ad workflow has a design approval. Rather than an editorial approval, I then have a marketing approval and a legal approval. And you could have, when we see cases like this in production, usually there's more differences, like they may want to do trapping only on the ad pages, or they might want to do different pre-flight specs for ad versus editor for different file types. And these workflows can get quite different. The question then is, what do you do in the project if maybe you're creating a project and this applies to project templates too, but maybe you're in a case where you say I have more editorial pages than ads, so I'll make, let's actually make it, actually I'm not going to make a new project here. I have a rule behind the scenes that will break the demo I was going to do. But you could say I'm going to make the edit workflow the main workflow here. But actually, this will work. Let me make a new project so I can show you here. So I'll just do it with the default template in here without any fancy setup. And we'll say that we're going to make edit pages our default in here because we have more edit pages than ads. And I'm going to add myself in as an admin. And I'm going to add there's an approver for both of these steps now, just to keep it simple. And I've got some pages here. I have an input rule behind the scenes that tells this if a file name has ed in the middle, then it's an editorial page. So I'll upload a few of these. And I'll upload maybe one ad page as well. And our files came in, they picked up from the input rule we have behind the scenes the correct workflows, I believe. Yep, you can see they're running through add workflow and edit workflow. But the problem over here is we see that the edit pages look fine. They've got their design and edit approvals assignments. But if you look here, we have the design approvals assigned because that's common to both of these two workflows. But the marketing and the legal approval doesn't get set. And if we were to tweak the setup here to use the add workflow instead, we'd have the opposite problem. So what do you do in a case like this? Typically what you want to do in a case like this, and this is something you do at the project template level again, is make what we call like a placeholder workflow, or it's basically a stand-in workflow that this isn't really meant to be run. In fact, in this example, I put a digital delivery where it would maybe transmit the file and then the document step to physically delete it out of ES, or maybe redirect it to the correct workflow. But basically, this deletes the document. We don't want things to actually run through this. But it has the milestones in here and the approval steps for both those workflows. Then when we create the template for that job, or the new job itself, we tell it to use the placeholder workflow as the default workflow. The files in this particular case are using their workflows being chosen based off the input rule, so they shouldn't be hitting this in the first place. If you're concerned about it, you could build in your own catch-all to either transmit it to another location or send out a warning email or something that something hit a workflow it shouldn't have. But this allows you to see all the approval steps in here for both those workflows and do the assignments. And if I make a new project with this template in here, actually I gotta go under I don't have my templates assigned to that other guy. And I'll choose the overloading approvals in here. You'll see that it pulls that placeholder workflow. And now if I just upload a few of these pages again, let's push a whole bunch in. When they start crunching through, we should see that we have an ad here that has all its approvals assigned. And we've got an editorial page up here that has all its approvals assigned. So that's one way you can work around and get approval assignments handled for a project that uses multiple workflows. Now, one other way you could do this is, and we see this at customers where they might have different departments that want to look at pages and they want to keep like an archive of those pages. They want to work in their own little space within a project before the files are finalized, and they want to preserve their individual work. Or maybe you want to do this same add versus edit split, but you don't want to have to key off file name. One other option you have when you're setting up these project templates is you have the ability to add folders in here. You can always create a folder in an ES project by just right-clicking and saying new folder. But again, this is something you're not going to generally want to do every individual project because you have to set permissions for who can see it. So you can also do this in the project template. You have the ability to control which folders are automatically created when the project starts. There's two types in here. There's folders, and I don't think I've ever actually used that. I think that was an older version of the file system folder option in here. But the general idea of the subfolder is it's a folder within a project, and you can tell it to create these automatically when the project is created. And in this case, maybe our default workflow is edit. So anything that comes into the project as a whole is going to go through the edit workflow. You can have, I do have edit workflow folder here, just uses the default properties. If I select the add folder here, you'll see I have this custom properties box checked. And what this means is I can set up my own custom job settings for anything that comes into this particular folder. I can also set up my own permissions to control if only certain groups or users are allowed to see this. But I can have my own custom settings with different users assigned to it, different workflow. This is using the add workflow instead of the edit workflow, and then I can set up different approvers. We do see cases where folks use different workflows for these subfolders. There are also some cases where they tend to use the same workflow, but they might have different approvers or different roles in a subfolder because it might be a special file type that not everyone needs to work with. So what I can do here is, I see we got a question coming on, still no folder color option. There should be an option here, it looks like, for color space and viewing condition if you want to set those at the subfolder level. I would have to check if there was a specific ticket or specific issue with this. Let me know and I can check with whatever tech worked on it to see if that's behaving for you now.
For actual folder color.
Oh, the folder color, like the actual color coding. I don't think there's a way to do that, unfortunately, at the moment.
Yeah, the only way to do stuff like that, there was a desktop or yeah, I guess it would be desktops that you could assign specific colors and specific icons to folders depending on their name and things like that. I'd have to go back to that. That was a couple of years ago. But we'll see if I can find that webinar and forward that to you.
So we have two folders here, the add and edit, the ones using a different workflow. So you'll see that if, for example, I go over here, I'll create a new project that uses this template. And you'll see as soon as this is created, you'll see that we have our two folders in here. And if I upload files, whatever they are, to the add folder, they're going to use the add workflow. So those have all our add approvals. And if I upload them to the edit folder, then those are going to use the edit workflow, not because I assigned one specifically to this folder, but because that's the default for the overall project, because these were set to just inherit from whatever the overall project was using, which I think is time for actually a good note of caution in here is if you don't want to do specific settings for a folder, like if you're not running with the add workflow separately here or a separate approval group, then it is generally best to have these set to inherit from parent. I think we have had a few tickets over the years where it's easy to accidentally click this radio box, and then you run into an issue where maybe you change approvers in the overall template or job, and they're not getting picked up on the subfolder. then that's one thing to check, is to make sure you have that inherit from parent selected if you don't need the custom properties. That is also something to check if you do see something that's not behaving the way you expect in a subfolder. Double check, because it may have custom properties or it might have its own separate working group in there. So that's always one thing to look out for. Now, one thing in here to move on is that I think might be a little forgotten is they're called project templates. So we tend to think of them in terms of projects. But project templates do also have utility on the file system. So when you go to create a new file system in ES, for the IO volumes here, you have the ability to set up the smart view and also the project template that's used to handle all the work that runs through that file system. By default, most people, I think, set that to 0 or one of the stock ones, so it just generates a preview. But you can use something a little more complex there. So for example, I built a project template here that does some, it just has my approval workflow with my users. I also did add in here, I actually took the liberty of adding in a job ticket layout. If you link job ticket layouts in a project template like this, then it's a way of getting non-global job ticket layouts to show somewhere. In this case, I built a job ticket layout called Asset Details. And this is I think Mike showed it in a few of the previews we've done of ES6 recently. This is something new that they have in ES6 called a collapsible job ticket specifically. So this is a job ticket this is a page job ticket that will show up in the right-hand sidebar that you sometimes see on the side of the project. So now if I go to my file system here, you'll see that this is using, I go over here to this tab, you'll see that my files in the file system are running through the full workflow. So file systems don't have to be just a straight dump where you have a bunch of files and previews. You can have full approval cycles in here. You can have complex workflow, normalization, and e-twist, basically anything you'd want in a project here. And you can see here that I also have my Asset Details tab, which did I mess something up here? Let me check to make sure I didn't do anything horrible to this before I started the webinar. That all looks normal. Let me actually log out and log back in. That was kind of cool. I'm going to show it off so it works. If not, I may have to ask you to use your imagination. Yep, there we go. So you can see here that we have our job ticket that we brought in, a custom job ticket here for this. So maybe for files in the DAM, we wanted the ability to add a tagline or like a SKU number for something, or like the subject of what's in here. That's being pulled into this file system based off of the job ticket layout that we attached to our project template, which we attached to this file system.
To mention, you can do that on multiple files as well, which is really nice. It'll edit metadata on multiple files at one time.
Yeah.
So. I think you are missing the OK button to actually save those changes.
Yep. I'm still learning here. This is a new feature, so I just noticed that myself. But let's see here. So I think that's the basics of this. I'm trying to look through my notes to see if there were a few gotchas I wanted to warn people about. I think I already mentioned a few of them while I was doing the actual presentation. The first was the curse of subfolders, which was to make sure that if you're making changes in a project or project template and you don't see them applying in a subfolder, double check the subfolder to make sure it's not using a custom settings if it doesn't need to. And even if it does need to, that may be the reason your changes aren't showing up. The second thing I think I mentioned as a gotcha was if you make changes to a template those aren't going to affect an existing project because it only really copies from the template when you create the project. If you make changes to the template after the fact, it's not going to pick those up until the new project. Theoretically, if you wanted to, I believe you could go in here and let's actually test it now. I'm pretty sure if you change, like this is just using the stock template, I'm pretty sure if you change this, it'll restart everything. Yep. So I know it doesn't look like it picked up my approvers there, but it did change the workflow. So you can toggle back and forth, I think, between like another template and then go back to the one to try and pull changes. But usually that's a little too cumbersome. It's a little too cumbersome if you're doing that in the middle of a live job. So that's one thing to keep in mind, is that those won't apply until you create a next job. The third thing is deleting project templates. Generally, if you can't delete a project template from the system until you've removed or reassigned all projects that use it. One area to watch out for this in particular is file systems, because I think we had a customer that was cleaning up some old stuff in one of their systems recently. They were asking about this. I would be wary in particular file systems. If you need to delete a template that a file system was using, or you want to change a template with the file system, I think from the conversations I had with Dalim, you might have concerns about that reprocessing all the work on that file system. So if you had a case like that where you wanted to delete or change the template on a file system rather than just editing the template to use different settings, by all means open up a support ticket with us and we can discuss it before making the change. Just safe is better than sorry there. So no, I think there's two more questions here and then I'll start wrapping up. I do see a few questions coming in I'll get to.
We'll cover the questions, we'll wrap up, and then we'll go over the questions.
Yep. Yep, I'm just trying to make sure nothing's coming up related to what I'm talking about. But there's two main questions left, I think, with these. The first is, how many templates should I have? Generally, I think this depends on what sort of production you do on your systems. Because if you're like a publisher or something, if you've got internal staff or you're using the system internally mostly, then you can probably get away with using project templates for multiple different jobs or multiple different customers, because you might have shared or common approvers even in separate customers or separate brands in ES. Whereas if you have third-party users, that generally, if you've got third-party users that are doing their own work on the system, by nature, then I think you're going to wind up having more project templates, just based on needing those separate approvers broken out into separate templates. But one thing that I will mention there is you may be able to reduce the number of project templates you have depending on where you store information. Because I think this ties into a bit of a bigger question of where do these things fit into the big picture of ES? And it's where are all the different places you can store settings in ES. That's what I think a lot of the recent webinars we've been doing come down to, is that when you have settings you need to store, you can put them in a project job ticket. You can put them in a customer job ticket. You can put them in a process parameter. You can put them in an input rule, a workflow, or now a project template. So it's how do these fit in the big picture? Where do I put my settings? And I think what it boils down to is, first off, for the main categories, process parameters, which we covered last month, would be for any broadly applicable setting you're using across multiple customers, across just a large chunk of the system. It's a setting that you use very widely and you want stored in one place so you don't have a lot of redundancy. Process parameters would be a place for that. If you've got a customer-specific setting that is the same for all jobs in a customer, regardless of what template they're using, and something that doesn't change a lot or need to be edited by the end user, then I would say that customer job tickets are the best place for that. Anything at the job ticket level, the individual job level, that's where job-specific settings, customer job level job ticket layouts come into play, and then input rules and workflow, individual workflow interventions. That gets down to the specific file level, and file and job tickets, of course. I would say in this case, you're going to be dealing job ticket layouts or project templates are going to be dealing at this job level. But depending on what the information you have in your job ticket is, you might be able to move some of that to another level, higher up level, so that you don't need to, you don't have to create as many project templates. The example that I'm thinking of here is maybe you've got a situation in your job ticket where you've got like a custom job ticket at the project level where you're choosing a print location and a output PDF type. If this is something that changes at the job level fairly frequently, then this would be a good candidate for this job level, project level job ticket. And you can in fact set defaults for those in your project templates. So I think I have my template here. You do have, if you have a job ticket layout, actually I think I'm looking in the wrong thing here. Yep, oh, here it is. Yep, so you can set those in the project template level. If this is something where you have a general setting for most jobs, use these settings, but you wanted to be able to change it at the job level, you could do that here. If, for example, and this is, I bring this up in this context because this is something I don't think a lot of folks tend to consider because it hasn't been shown a lot in presentations. But if, for example, these settings were fixed at the customer level, and you know this customer always prints at one specific location, you can always set that as a customer level job ticket. So that, for example, when you come in to view the customer setup, you get that job ticket here, and you can set their print location and their output type here. That way, if the reason for doing that would be that if you had maybe 3 or 4 project templates that customer used for different projects, if their print location or their PDF output type changed, you'd have to change that in those 3 or 4 templates then. If you set that at the higher level of hierarchy, then you could just set that once here, change it. If it needs to update, change it in one place. And that way, maybe even be able to reduce the number of project templates you have, depending on how your setup works. But I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to cover. So.
All right. So go over the question. Thanks, Alex. One I did want to mention, we did have one person that bothered to type in hallelujah, and I'm sure a lot of us were actually thinking it when I think this was specific to being able to manage the project templates and duplicate them and see them all in one spot. So
yeah, that's a long time coming to be able to edit them here. And the biggest thing is the duplication, because we were talking about this internally the other week, and that's what Mike was saying, is before if you ran into a case where you maybe had two customers that were using the same project template because they did like the same approvers, but then something changed and you needed to duplicate that and split them into using 2 templates, you previously would have had to go in and manually copy those settings into a new project template. Whereas here you could just duplicate this and say, give it a new name, and then very easily from in there unlink your one customer from this one, and then easily link your customer to this one here. So.
All right. Yeah, going back to the color question, we can have someone contact you and go over that and see if there's a way to help you with that on the setting the color on folders. We have a question here. In ES6, is there a way to use the API to do the conversion of a file system folder to an ES project? I'm not sure if you know that or not, Alex. I don't.
I don't know offhand, so I would have to check. I'll get in touch with you.
Yeah, we'll get in touch with you on that. And then the inevitable ES6, when will it be out? Dalim is saying that it should be official in December. Target is the Worldwide Technology Meeting. All of you should have received an invitation to the Worldwide Technology Meeting. It is going to be an event you can attend if you were able to travel in Germany, but they are doing it virtually this year because of the pandemic. So it's a very good opportunity. If you haven't gotten the invitation, and all of you on the webinar should have received the invitation to this if you're Dalim customers. It's a great opportunity to be able to actually attend this event virtually. Usually you have to be able to travel to Germany and attend it. But it's a fantastic event, especially not having had a duo this year. Great chance to have a day and a half of conference itself, where Dalim will be going over ES6, going over the future of ES, as well as Trist and Litho and all the products. Then included with the attendance, there is a fee for it. There's also 2 days of training on ES6 that will follow on the Thursday and Friday. So the event itself starts December 1st, a Tuesday, goes on through Wednesday, and then the training will be the Thursday and Friday of that week, if I had that correct. So I would definitely encourage you, if you can, to sign up for that. Great opportunity. I'm very curious to see how they do the virtual event. I was speaking with Graham, and he was mentioning some software they found to do it, and I'm going to see how good that comes out. But you'll definitely hear a lot of, I'm sorry, AirMeet is the name of the software that Graham just texted me. So I encourage you, if you haven't received an invitation to that, please contact us at text@blanchis.com or Graham directly, and we'll be happy to forward you that. So again, we are looking at the imminent release of ES6 now. Should be official. They want to announce it at the Worldwide Technology Meeting itself. So I think that's all the questions. Let's see. Yep, okay. I think that was it. So if you can attend the Worldwide Technology Meeting, the webinar on, I believe it's going to be December 16th. So the December tips and tricks webinar will be a wrap up of the Worldwide Technology Meeting. Any new information I can squeeze into roughly an hour of a 4-day event. But we try to get that out to you just so you know what's going on if you're not able to attend the event itself. So talk to y'all next month. Everybody have a great week, and thanks again for attending.